But we're having adventures, and I have to go to rehab tomorrow.
Hi, friends. Host Eric here. Let's talk with nice people. And we are talking today about a disclaimer of sorts, or setting the record straight. There appears to be some busybody law enforcement personnel or something who think that I do illegal drugs because I talk about doing speed a lot. Let me make clear I have a prescription for Adderall, which I take as prescribed. And I talk about it as being speed because earlier in my life, I was a methamphetamine addict for about 4 years. That was way back in around 2001 through 2005, kind of like in there. Uh, and my basic position on it is Adderall and methamphetamine are more or less the same drug. Methamphetamine is treated by people in terms of their beliefs about it as devil, some sort of devil drug that ruins your life and renders you useless and toothless and stupid and trashy. But speed in general is a drug that interacts with the person's motivation. For an extroverted intuitive like myself and any other ENTP and any other ENFP, there are problems that come along with applying directed attention over time. And the reason for this is because we prioritize metaphysical action, and that's necessarily contraindicative, though not exclusive, of physical action. To take metaphysical action is to explore more possibilities, usually in a realm of conditionality. And thus, we have trouble with following through on things that have already been decided. We come up with a really good idea and we want to follow through on it. That's a struggle for us. It's not such a struggle for us to come up with really good ideas, to articulate them well, to think them out, to understand them. To follow through and make them happen is the challenge. And the reason is because when you prioritize metaphysical action as your dominant nature, you prefer to preserve potentiality over making things manifest. So, what speed does for people like me is it extends time such that following through on, if I have 10 units of follow through in me, those 10 units buy me 100 points of follow through rather than just 10 points of follow through. Why? Because things aren't frustrating. I don't get distracted so easily. I don't run out of gumption or directed application of will, purposed will, as easily. And so, in those, because of my nature and because of people's having different cognitive function stacks, and because of people having different backgrounds and histories and needs and natures and ways and all sorts of things, people have different relationships with different drugs. A lot of people can drink alcohol successfully and enjoy their relationship with that drug and think it's perfectly fine to take it. I can't. I'm an alcoholic, so that means I don't drink well. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be allowed to drink. And same thing with speed. Most people don't do speed well. It's not a drug that matches up well with a whole lot of different cognitive approaches, but it does enable me to perform better in general, and at least it enables me to stay focused for longer periods of time. I'm not necessarily attending to things that ought to be prioritized, but it's not like I do necessarily if I'm not on anything anyway. the point is, life is complicated. Life is hard. Being an individual means having some things that you're good at naturally and some things that you're bad at naturally. The problem is that there's a presumption that because something's a problem for some people, that it's at least a little bit bad for everybody. But it doesn't work that way. You know, what might be a boon for someone might be a plague for another. That's why we can't compel, by way of force, these mores regarding drugs upon every other individual. If you're somebody who's out there enforcing drug laws, for example, you are an individual human being like me. Bob. Your name's Bob. You're a dude. You're some dude. Except you think it's okay to point guns at people and lock them in cages and shit because you don't like the drugs they do. Well, I mean, I guess it's not really that. It's so much, it's the laws that allow you to do it and justify it with the law. But the problem is those laws are always applied arbitrarily. Why? Nobody calls you and says, I just got drug did nearby. Yeah, I was standing there and someone was near me and they were just standing there, but I could tell they were on drugs. And that caused me to break my legs. No, it doesn't happen like that. Nobody calls the cops and says, we need to go get blah because he's victimizing people, because he's transgressing upon people. There is nobody for whom the police or the prosecutors are seeking justice when they enforce drug laws. The vast majority of people who commit drug crimes are never caught or prosecuted. Like 99%, 99.9% of drug crimes are never caught or prosecuted. Can you imagine if 99.9% of murders were never caught and prosecuted? Why, people would say the police were doing a terrible job. Right? Well, why aren't they doing a terrible job on drug crimes? Because nobody thinks that prosecuting 100% of drug crimes is a good idea. Nobody thinks everyone who's ever done drugs should be in jail. Nobody. But nobody thinks it would be okay if the police let 99% of actual criminals go, because actual criminals have transgressed upon the rights of somebody. They have done real harm. And thus, justice demands society provide an answer. The only harms done when police and prosecutors pursue drug laws as prosecutorial points of interest is harms done by the law, by those individuals representing the government, by our community members who are supposed to be there protecting us, instead directly harming us. And the flimsy justification is that prosecuting 0.0001% of all drug crimes is good. I mean, stops drugs, shows how serious we are, rids our communities of drugs. Well, we know it doesn't do any of that stuff. That it keeps people safe. We know it doesn't do that. It hurts people when you take them away in handcuffs and lock them in cages. It hurts people when you separate them from their families. It harms people when you seize their property. It harms people when you give them fines. It harms people when you detain them on the side of the road because you want to look at their car or something. It's a cancer on America, on the world. Here are some reasons here's some times when it's okay for us to beat you up for no reason. Like, if we don't like the way your hat looks, or if it's Wednesday, or if I'm in a bad mood, then we get to beat you up. Otherwise, it's not okay for us to beat you up. Well, fuck you. That's the same thing as it's completely arbitrary. You can arrest and detain people whenever you want. No, that's not true. They have to be in possession of a... Man, just because the law allows you to arbitrarily arrest people according to your whim and bend the rules and let them go if you feel like it, because nobody complains because nobody's been transgressed against. So just because the law allows you to arbitrarily execute use of force against completely decent human beings who just happen to engage in ontological doctoring of themselves in fashions for their own reasons that you don't understand. You couldn't possibly understand because you aren't inside that person's head. But you are up inside that person's body. And you're feeling pretty smug about it. And you really ought to be deeply ashamed of yourself. The end.